Hi, sweet people, and welcome back. I am reading again today from the book Kidnapped by Robert Louis Stevenson. Chapter 3, I Make Acquaintance of My Uncle. Presently there came a great rattling of chains and bolts, and the door was cautiously opened and shut to again behind me as soon as I had passed. "Go into the kitchen and touch nothing," said the voice, and while the person of the house set himself to replacing the defenses of the door, I groped my way forward and entered the kitchen. The fire had burned up fairly bright and showed me the barest room I think I ever put my eyes on. Half a dozen dishes stood upon the shelves. The table was laid for supper with a bowl of porridge, a horn spoon, and a cup of small beer. Besides what I have named, there was not another thing in that great stone-vaulted empty chamber but lock-fast chests arranged along the wall and a corner cupboard with a padlock. As soon as the last chain was up, the man rejoined me. He was a mean, stooping, narrow-shouldered, clay-faced creature, and his age might have been anything between 50 and 70. His nightcap was of flannel, and so was the nightgown that he wore, instead of coat and waistcoat, over his ragged shirt. He was long unshaved, but what most distressed and even daunted me, he would neither take his eyes away from me nor look me fairly in the face. What he was, whether by trade or birth, was more than I could fathom, but he seemed most like an old, unprofitable serving man who should have been left in charge of that big house upon board wages. "Are ye sharp set?" he asked, glancing at about the level of my knee. "Ye can eat that drop parritch?" I said I feared it was his own supper. "Oh," said he, "I can do fine wanting it. I'll take the ale, though, for it slockens my cough." He drank the cup about half out, still keeping an eye upon me as he drank, and then suddenly held out his hand. "Let's see the letter," said he. I told him the letter was for Mr. Balfour, not for him. "And who do you think I am?" says he. "Give me Alexander's letter." "You know my father's name?" "It would be strange if I didna," he replied, "for he was my born brother, and little as ye seem to like either me or my house or my good parritch, I'm your born uncle, Davy, my man, and you my born nephew. So give us the letter and sit down and fill your kite." If I had been some years younger, what with shame, weariness, and disappointment, I believe I had burst into tears. As it was, I could find no words, neither black nor white, but handed him the letter and sat down to the porridge with as little appetite for meat as ever a young man had. Meanwhile, my uncle, stooping over the fire, turned the letter over and over in his hands. "Do ye ken what's in it?" he asked suddenly. "You see for yourself, sir," said I, "that the seal has not been broken." "Aye," said he, "but what brought you here?" "To give the letter," said I. "No," says he cunningly, "but you'll have had some hopes, nae doubt." "I confess, sir," said I, "when I was told that I had kinsfolk well-to-do, I did indeed indulge the hope that they might help me in my life. But I am no beggar. I look for no favors at your hands, and I want none that are not freely given. For as poor as I appear, I have friends of my own that will be blithe to help me." "Hoot toot," said Uncle Ebenezer. "Dinna fly up in the snuff at me. We'll agree fine yet. And Davy, my man, if you're done with that bit parritch, I could just take a sup of it myself. Aye," he continued, as soon as he had ousted me from the stool and spoon, "they're fine, halesome food, they're grand food, parritch." He murmured a little grace to himself and fell to. "Your father was very fond of his meat, I mind. He was a hearty, if not a great eater. But as for me, I could never do mair than pike at food." He took a pull at the small beer, which probably reminded him of hospitable duties, for his next speech ran thus: "If you're dry, you'll find water behind the door." To this I returned no answer, standing stiffly on my 2 feet, and looking down upon my uncle with a mighty angry heart. He, on his part, continued to eat like a man under some pressure of time, and to throw out little darting glances now at my shoes and now at my homespun stockings. Once only, when he had ventured to look a little higher, our eyes met, and no thief taken with a hand in a man's pocket could have shown more lively signals of distress. This set me in a muse, whether his timidity arose from too long a disuse of any human company, and whether perhaps upon a little trial it might pass off and my uncle change into an altogether different man. From this I was awakened by his sharp voice. "Your father's been long dead?" he asked. 3 weeks, sir, said I. "He was a secret man, Alexander. A secret, silent man," he continued. Excuse me. "He never said muckle when he was young. He'll never have spoken muckle of me?" "I never knew, sir, till you told it me yourself that he had any brother." Dear me, said Ebenezer. "Nor yet of Shaw's, I dare say?" "Not so much as the name, sir," said I. "To think of that," said he, "a strange nature of a man." For all that, he seemed singularly satisfied, but whether with himself or me, or with this conduct of my father's, was more than I could read. Certainly, however, he seemed to be outgrowing that distaste or ill will that he had conceived at first against my person, for presently he jumped up, came across the room behind me, and hit me a smack upon the shoulder. "We'll agree fine yet," he cried. "I'm just as glad I let you in. And now come away to your bed." To my surprise, he lit no lamp or candle, but set forth into the dark passage, groped his way, breathing deeply, up a flight of steps, and paused before a door which he unlocked. I was close upon his heels, having stumbled after him as best I might, and then he bade me go in, for that was my chamber. I did as he bid, but paused after a few steps, and begged a light to go to bed with. "Hoot toot," said Uncle Ebenezer. "There's a fine moon." "Neither moon nor star, sir, and pit mirk," said I. "I canna see the bed." Hoot toot, said he. "Lights in a house is a thing I dinna agree with. I'm uncofeared of fires. Good night to you, Davy, my man." And before I had time to further protest, he pulled the door to, and I heard him lock me in from the outside. I did not know whether to laugh or cry. The room was as cold as a well, and the bed, when I had found my way to it, as damp as a peat hag. But by good fortune I had caught up my bundle and my plaid, and rolling myself in the ladder, I lay down upon the floor under lee of the big bedstead, and fell speedily asleep. With the first peep of day I opened my eyes to find myself in a great chamber, hung with stamped leather, furnished with fine embroidered furniture, and lit by 3 fair windows. 10 years ago, or perhaps 20, it must have been as pleasant a room to lie down or awake in as a man could wish. But damp, dirt, disuse, and the mice and spiders had done their worst since then. Many of the window panes, besides, were broken, and indeed this was so common a feature in that house that I believe my uncle must at some time have stood a siege from his indignant neighbors, perhaps with Janet Clouston at their head. Meanwhile, the sun was shining outside, and being very cold in that miserable room, I knocked and shouted till my jailer came and let me out. He carried me to the back of the house, where was a draw well, and told me to wash my face there if I wanted, and when that was done, I made the best of my own way back to the kitchen, where he had lit the fire and was making the porridge. The table was laid with 2 bowls and 2 horn spoons, but the same single measure of small beer. Perhaps my eye rested on this particular with some surprise, and perhaps my uncle observed it, for he spoke up as if in answer to my thought, asking me if I would like to drink ale, for so he called it. I told him such was my habit, but not to put himself about. Nah, said he, "I'll deny you nothing in reason." He fetched another cup from the shelf, and then to my great surprise, instead of drawing more beer, he poured an accurate half from one cup to the other. There was a kind of nobleness in this that took my breath away. If my uncle was certainly a miser, he was one of that thorough breed that goes near to make the vice respectable. When we had made an end of our meal, my Uncle Ebenezer unlocked a drawer and drew out of it a clay pipe and a lump of tobacco, from which he cut one fill before he locked it up again. Then he sat down in the sun at one of the windows and silently smoked. From time to time his eyes came coasting round to me, and he shot out one of his questions. Once it was, "And your mother?" And when I had told him that she too was dead, "Aye, she was a bonny lassie." Then, after another long pause, "Whae were these friends of yours?" I told him they were different gentlemen of the name of Campbell, though indeed there was only one, and that the minister, that had ever taken the least note of me. But I began to think my uncle made too light of my position, and finding myself all alone with him, I did not wish him to suppose me helpless. He seemed to turn this over in his mind, and then, "Davy, my man," said he, "you've come to the right bit when you came to your Uncle Ebenezer. I've a great notion of the family, and I mean to do the right by you, but while I'm taking a bit think to myself of what's the best thing to put you to, whether the law or the ministry or maybe the army, while it's what boys are fondest of. I wouldn't have liked the Balfours to be humbled before a ween Highland Campbells, and I'll ask you to keep your tongue within your teeth. No letters, no messages, no kind of word to anybody, or else there's my door." "Uncle Ebenezer," said I, "I've no manner of reason to suppose you mean anything but well by me. For all that, I would have you to know that I have a pride of my own. It was by no will of mine that I came seeking you, and if you show me your door again, I'll take you at the word." He seemed grievously put out. "Hoots toots," he said. "Canny man, canny. Bide a day or two. I'm no warlock to find a fortune for you in the bottom of a parritch bowl, but just you give me a day or two and say nothing to nobody, and as sure, I'll do the right by you." "Very well," said I, "enough said. If you want to help me, there's no doubt I'll be glad of it, and none but I'll be grateful." It seemed to me, too soon, I dare say, that I was getting the upper hand of my uncle, and I began next to say that I must have the bed and bedclothes aired and put to sundry, for nothing would make me sleep in such a pickle. "Is this my house or yours?" said he in his keen voice, and then all of a sudden broke off. Nah, said he, "I dinna mean that. What's mine is yours, Davy, my man, and what's yours is mine. Blood's thicker than water, and there's nobody but you and me that ought the name." And then on he rambled about the family, and his ancient greatness, and his father that began to enlarge the house, and himself that stopped the building as a sinful waste, and this put it in my head to give him Janet Clouston's message. "The limmer," he cried, 1215. That's every day since I had the limmer roe pit. Dod, Davy, I'll have her roasted on red peats before I'm by with it. A witch, a proclaimed witch. I'll af and see the session clerk." And with that he opened a chest and got out a very old and well-preserved blue coat and waistcoat, and a good enough beaver hat, both without lace. These he threw on anyway, and taking a staff from the cupboard, locked it all up again, and was for setting out, when a thought arrested him. "I canna leave you by yourself in the house," said he. "I'll have to lock you out." The blood came to my face. "If you lock me out," I said, "it'll be the last you'll see of me in friendship." He turned very pale and sucked his mouth in. "This is no the way," he said, looking wickedly at a corner of the floor. "This is no the way to win my favor, David." "Sir," says I, "with a proper reverence for your age and our common blood, I do not value your favor at a bottle's purchase. I was brought up to have a good conceit of myself, and if you were all the uncle and all the family I had in the world 10 times over, I wouldn't buy your liking at such prices." Uncle Ebenezer went and looked out of the window for a while. I could see him all trembling and twitching like a man with palsy, but when he turned round he had a smile upon his face. "Well, well," said he, "we must bear and forbear. I'll no go, that's all that's to be said of it." "Uncle Ebenezer," I said, "I can make nothing out of this. You use me like a thief. You hate to have me in this house. You let me see it, every word and every minute. It's not possible that you can like me. And as for me, I've spoken to you as I never thought to speak to any man. Why do you seek to keep me then? Let me gang back. Let me gang back to the friends I have and that like me." Nah, he said very earnestly. "I like you fine. We'll agree fine yet, and for the honor of the house I couldn't have let you leave the way you came. Bide here quiet, there's a good lad. Just you bide here quiet a bitty, and you'll find that we agree." "Well, sir," said I, after I had thought the matter out in silence, "I'll stay a while. It's more just I should be helped by my own blood than strangers, and if we don't agree, I'll do my best it shall be through no fault of mine." Chapter 4. I run a great danger in the House of Shaws. For a day that was begun so ill, the day passed fairly well. We had the porridge cold again at noon, and hot porridge at night. Porridge and small beer was my uncle's diet. He spoke but little, and that in the same way as before, shooting a question at me after a long silence, and when I sought to lead him in talk about my future, slipped out of it again. In a room next door to the kitchen, where he suffered me to go, I found a great number of books, both Latin and English, in which I took great pleasure all the afternoon. Indeed, the time passed so lightly in this good company that I began to be almost reconciled to my residence at Shaw's, and nothing but the sight of my uncle and his eyes playing hide-and-seek with mine revived the force of my distress. One thing I discovered which put me in some doubt. This one was an entry on the fly-leaf of a chapter book, one of Patrick Walker's, plainly written by my father's hand, and thus conceived, to my brother Ebenezer on his 5th birthday. Now, what puzzled me was this, that as my father was, of course, the younger brother, he must either have made some strange error, or he must have written, before he was yet 5, an excellent, clear, manly hand of writing. I tried to get this out of my head, but though I took down many interesting authors, old and new, history, poetry, and storybook, this notion of my father's hand of writing stuck to me. And when at length I went back into the kitchen and sat down once more to porridge and small beer, the first thing I said to Uncle Ebenezer was to ask him if my father had not been very quick at his book. "Alexander? Know him," was the reply. "I was far quicker myself. I was a clever chappie when I was young. Why, I could read as soon as he could." This puzzled me yet more, and a thought coming into my head, I asked if he and my father had been twins. He jumped upon his stool, and the horn spoon fell out of his hand upon the floor. "What gars ye ask that?" he said, and he caught me by the breast of the jacket and looked this time straight into my eyes. His own were little and light and bright like a bird's, blinking and winking strangely. "What do you mean?" I asked very calmly, for I was far stronger than he and not easily frightened. "Take your hand away from my jacket. This is no way to behave." My uncle seemed to make a great effort upon himself. "Dod, man David, you shouldn't speak to me about your father. That's where the mistake is." He sat a while and shook, blinking in his plate. "He was all the brother that ever I had," he added, but with no heart in his voice, and then he caught up his spoon and fell to supper again, but still shaking. Now this last passage, this laying of hands upon my person and sudden profession of love for my dead father, went so clean beyond my comprehension that it put into me both fear and hope. On the one hand, I began to think my uncle was perhaps insane and might be dangerous. On the other, there came up into my mind, quite unbidden by me and even discouraged, a story like some ballad I had heard folks singing of a poor lad that was a rightful heir and a wicked kinsman that tried to keep him from his own. For why should my uncle play a part with a relative that came, almost a beggar, to his door, unless in his heart he had some cause to fear him? With this notion, all unacknowledged, but nevertheless getting firmly settled in my head, I now began to imitate his covert looks, so that we sat at table like a cat and mouse, each stealthily observing the other. Not another word had he to say to me, black or white, but was busy turning something secretly over in his mind, and the longer we sat and the more I looked at him, the more certain I became that the something was unfriendly to myself. When he had cleared the platter, he got out a single pipeful of tobacco, just as in the morning, turned round a stool into the chimney corner, and sat a while smoking with his back to me. "Davy," he said at length, "I've been thinking." Then he paused and said it again. "There's a wee bit siller that I have promised you before you were born," he continued. "Promised it to your father. Oh, nothing legal, you understand, just gentlemen daffing at their wine. Well, I keep it that bit money separate. It was a great expense, but a promise is a promise, and it has grown by now to be a matter of just precisely, just exactly," and here he paused and stumbled, "of just exactly 40 pounds. This last he rapped out with a sidelong glance over his shoulder, and the next moment added, almost with a scream, "Scots!" The pound Scots being the same thing as an English shilling, the difference made by this second thought was considerable. I could see, besides, that the whole story was a lie, invented with some end which it puzzled me to guess, and I made no attempt to conceal the tone of raillery in which I answered. "Oh, think again, sir. Pound sterling, I believe." "That's what I said," returned my uncle, "pound sterling. And if you'll step out by to the door a minute, just to see what kind of a night it is, I'll get it out to you and call you in again." I did his will, smiling to myself in my contempt that he should think I was so easily to be deceived. It was a dark night with a few stars low down, and as I stood just outside the door, I heard a hollow moaning of wind far off among the hills. I said to myself there was something thundery and changeful in the weather, and little knew of what a vast importance that should prove to me before the evening passed. When I was called in again, my uncle counted out into my hand 37 golden guinea pieces. The rest was in his hand in small gold and silver, but his heart failed him there, and he crammed the change into his pocket. "There," said he, "that'll show you. I'm a queer man and strange with strangers, but my word is my bond, and there's the proof of it." Now my uncle seemed so miserly that I was struck dumb by this sudden generosity, and could find no words in which to thank him. "No a word," said he. "No thanks. I want no thanks. I do my duty. I'm no saying that everybody would have done it, but for my part, though I'm a careful body too, it's a pleasure to me to do the right by my brother's son, and it's a pleasure to me to think that now we'll agree as such near friends should." I spoke him in return as handsomely as I was able, but all the while I was wondering what would come next and why he had parted with his precious guineas. For as to the reason he had given, a baby would have refused it. Presently he looked towards me sideways. "And see here," says he, "tit for tat." I told him I was ready to prove my gratitude in any reasonable degree, and then waited, looking for some monstrous demand. And yet, when at last he plucked up courage to speak, it was only to tell me, very properly, as I thought, that he was growing old and a little broken, and that he would expect me to help him with the house and the bit of garden. I answered and expressed my readiness to serve. "Well," he said, "let's begin." He pulled out of his pocket a rusty key. "There," he says, "there's the key of the stair tower at the far end of the house. You can only win into it from the outside, for that part of the house is no finished. Gang ye in there and up the stairs and bring me down the chest that's at the top. There's papers in it," he added. "Can I have a light, sir?" said I. "Nah," said he very cunningly. "No lights in my house." "Very well, sir," said I. "Are the stairs good?" "They're grand," said he, and then as I was going, "Keep to the wall," he added. "There's no banisters, but the stairs are grand underfoot." Out I went into the night. The wind was still moaning in the distance, though never a breath of it came near the house of Shaw's. It had fallen blacker than ever, and I was glad to feel along the wall till I came the length of the stair tower door at the far end of the unfinished wing. I had got the key into the keyhole, and had just turned it, when all upon a sudden, without a sound of wind or thunder, the whole sky lighted up with wildfire and went black again. I had to put my hand over my eyes to get back to the color of the darkness, and indeed I was already half blinded when I stepped into the tower. It was so dark inside it seemed a body could scarce breathe, but I pushed out with foot and hand, and presently struck the wall with the one and the lowermost round of the stair with the other. The wall, by the touch, was of fine-hewn stone. The steps, too, though somewhat steep and narrow, were of polished mason-work, and regular and solid underfoot. Minding my uncle's word about the banisters, I kept close to the tower side, and felt my way in the pitch darkness with a beating heart. The house of Shaw's stood 5 full stories high, not counting lofts. Well, as I advanced, it seemed to me the stair grew airier and a thought more lightsome, and I was wondering what might be the cause of this change, when a second blink of the summer lightning came and went. If I did not cry out, it was because fear had me by the throat, and if I did not fall, it was more by heaven's mercy than my own strength. It was not only that the flash shone in on every side through breaches in the wall, so that I seemed to be clambering aloft upon an open scaffold, but the same passing brightness showed me the steps were of unequal length, and that one of my feet rested that moment within 2 inches of the well. This was the grand stair, I thought, and with the thought a gust of a kind of angry courage came into my heart. My uncle had sent me here, certainly to run great risks, perhaps to die. I swore I would settle that perhaps if I should break my neck for it. It got me down upon my hands and knees, and as slowly as a snail, feeling before me every inch and testing the solidity of every stone, I continued to ascend the stair. The darkness, by contrast with the flash, appeared to have redoubled. Nor was that all, for my ears were now troubled and my mind confounded by a great stir of bats in the top part of the tower, and the foul beasts, flying downwards, sometimes beat upon my face and body. The tower, I should have said, was square, and in every corner the step was made of a great stone of a different shape to join the flights. Well, I had come close to one of these turns when, feeling forward as usual, my hand slipped upon an edge and found nothing but emptiness beyond it. The stair had been carried no higher. To set a stranger mounting it in darkness was to send him straight to his death. And although, thanks to the lightning and my own precautions, I was safe enough, the mere thought of the peril in which I might have stood and the dreadful height I might have fallen from brought out the sweat upon my body and relaxed my joints. But I knew what I wanted now, and turned and groped my way down again with a wonderful anger in my heart. About halfway down, the wind sprang up in a clap and shook the tower and died again. The rain followed, and before I had reached the ground level, it fell in buckets. I put out my head into the storm and looked along towards the kitchen. The door, which I had shut behind me when I left, now stood open and shed a little glimmer of light, and I thought I could see a figure standing in the rain, quite still, like a man hearkening. And then there came a blinding flash, which showed me my uncle plainly, just where I had fancied him to stand, and hard upon it, the heels of it, a great torrent of thunder. Now, whether my uncle thought the crash to be the sound of my fall, or whether he heard in it God's voice denouncing murder, I will leave you to guess. Certain it is, at least, that he was seized on by a kind of panic fear, and that he ran into the house and left the door open behind him. I followed as softly as I could, and coming unheard into the kitchen, stood and watched him. He had found time to open the corner cupboard and bring out a great case bottle of aqua vitae, and now sat with his back towards me at the table. Ever and again he would be seized with a fit of deadly shuddering and groan aloud, and carrying the bottle to his lips, drank down the raw spirits by the mouthful. I stepped forward, came close behind him where he sat, and suddenly clapping my two hands down upon his shoulders, "Ah!" I cried. My uncle gave a kind of broken cry like a sheep's bleat, flung up his arms, and tumbled to the floor like a dead man. I was somewhat shocked at this, but I had myself to look to first of all, and did not hesitate to let him lie as he had fallen. The keys were hanging in the cupboard, and it was my design to furnish myself with arms before my uncle should come again to his senses and the power of devising evil. In the cupboard were a few bottles, some apparently of medicine, a great many bills and other papers, which I should willingly have enough rummaged had I had the time, and a few necessaries that were nothing to my purpose. Thence I turned to the chests. The first was full of meal, the second of money bags, and papers tied into sheaves. In the third, with many other things, and these for the most part of clothes, I found a rusty, ugly-looking Highland dirk without the scabbard. This, then, I concealed inside my waistcoat and turned to my uncle. He lay as he had fallen, all huddled, with one knee up and one arm sprawling abroad. His face had a strange color of blue, and he seemed to have ceased breathing. Fear came on me that he was dead. Then I got water and dashed it in his face, and with that he seemed to come a little to himself, working his mouth and fluttering his eyelids. At last he looked up and saw me, and there came into his eyes a terror that was not of this world. "Come, come," said I, "sit up." "Are you alive?" he sobbed. "Oh, man, are ye alive?" "That am I," said I, "small thanks to you." He had begun to seek for his breath with deep sighs. "The blue phial," he said, "in the aumrie, the blue phial." His breath came slower still. I ran to the cupboard, and sure enough found there a blue phial of medicine, with the dose written on it on a paper, and this I administered to him with what speed I might. "It's the trouble," said he, reviving a little. "I have a trouble, Davy. It's the heart." I set him on a chair and looked at him. It is true I felt some pity for a man that looked so sick, but I was full besides of righteous anger, and I numbered over before him the points in which I wanted explanation. Why he lied to me at every word, why he feared that I should leave him, why he disliked it to be hinted that he and my father were twins. "Is that because it is true?" I asked. Why he had given me money to which I was convinced I had no claim, and last of all, why he had tried to kill me. He heard me all through in silence, and then, in a broken voice, begged me to let him go to bed. "I'll tell you the morn," he said, "as sure as death I will." And so weak was he that I could do nothing but consent. I locked him into his room, however, and pocketed the key, and then returning through the kitchen, made up such a blaze as had not shone there for many a long year, and wrapping myself in my plaid, lay down upon the chests and fell asleep. We'll stop there and start with Chapter 5 next time. Thank you for watching and listening. Bye-bye.